The too hot to handle defense. So let's say you've just graduated from college and are drowning in more debt than a shopaholic at a Black Friday sale. And well, the current economy is as welcoming as a cactus-themed water park, so if you ever try to get a regular job, you'll probably spend the rest of your life paying back debts. So instead of that, you decide to pull off the heist of the century by borrowing, aka stealing, the Mona Lisa from the museum in your city. But of course, you're caught and thrown into jail. However, after contacting your lawyer, he found a loophole called too hot to handle as your defense in court. This legal loophole is basically the "it's just a prank, bro" of the courtroom. Apparently, your lawyer would argue that you are not a thief, but an art enthusiast who got carried away by the beautiful painting and just wanted a chance to have the Mona Lisa for just a day. Sounds like a joke, right? Well, it works. However, this defense only works for items that are extremely valuable, so you can't really use the same excuse when you steal a lip kit. It's the go big or go home of criminal defenses, except home might be a 6x8 cell in this case. Also, the only reason why it actually even works is because the judge or anybody with common sense would not believe that you can actually try to steal something so famous and valuable. It's like walking into the royal house and stealing the crown jewel in front of the royal guard. Basically, you must be too dumb to be a real criminal. The Son of Sam law. After what feels like an eternity of grieving and praying, the notorious serial killer who murdered your younger sister and 20 other women was finally caught, and according to the law, he is going to be spending the rest of his miserable life in a very tiny, cold cell. However, before you can even enjoy this great news, you hear that some movie producers approached him like a vulture and offered him a huge sum of money just to sell his story to them. What this simply means is that the killer would soon be a millionaire and profit from the fact that he caused pain and misery to millions of people. But before you start to tear your hair out in frustration, there's a legal loophole called the Son of Sam law that can make sure he doesn't get a penny out of selling his story. It's basically like a financial chastity belt for criminals, ensuring they can't profit from their misdeeds, and was coined after serial killer David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam, when he tried to pull the same stunt. This loophole ensures evil is not rewarded, and bad men can't just turn their prison cells into writing retreats to make a quick buck. So basically, no more killing people and becoming the #1 executive producer of the #1 hit TV series on Netflix. The Stand Your Ground laws. It's Friday night and you're walking home after work, taking a shortcut through an alley darker than your coffee on Monday morning. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a shady character pops out and threatens you. Instantly, your brain flips the fight or flight switch, and bam! You channel your inner karate master and land a punch that ends the guy's crime spree and his life. Now, you'll probably be thinking about how orange is definitely not your color and the disgusting jail food, but don't even worry, because thanks to legal loopholes like the Stand Your Ground law, you could be waving bye-bye to legal trouble faster than you can say self-defense. Take Joe Horn, for example. In 2007, he saw some burglars at his neighbor's house and decided to play a real-life Home Alone game. Although the 911 operator told him to stay inside, Joe, channeling his inner Kevin McAllister, grabbed his gun and went all vigilante on those poor burglars. When the dust settled, Joe's lawyers argued that Joe was just defending himself and his neighbor's stuff. And guess what? The court bought it. Joe walked out as free as a bird, and as for the burglars, let's just say they didn't get a second chance at life or the loot. Basically, this legal loophole gives you the ultimate pass to act like your favorite action hero, no cape required, and avoid jail even if you probably could have just made a graceful exit. It's like being allowed to play judge, jury, and action star all in one. The Entrapment Defense. After years of being a recovering addict, your new motto for life is to mind your business and live your best law-abiding life. But all this comes crashing down when a smooth-talking undercover cop convinces you to take just one pill, all to prove a point that addicts don't really change. Enter the Entrapment Defense, your ultimate trump card when the law pushes you to break the law. It's the legal equivalent of saying, "The devil made me do it," only this time the devil is wearing a badge. For instance, this defense came in handy for a Nebraska pharmacist, Carrie Ankrum, in 2006 when an undercover agent repeatedly asked him to sell prescription drugs illegally, laying it on thicker than peanut butter on a sandwich. Ankrum eventually caved, probably thinking they'd stop bugging him like a telemarketer if he cooperated. And well, you can guess what happened after he caved. They tried to charge him in court, but he used the entrapment defense and won. The insanity defense. In 2001, a woman named Andrea Yates drowned all 5 of her children, which is just straight up evil. You'd think this is going to be an open and shut case, right? Because the prosecutors had all the evidence, right? Well, her lawyers blamed all of her actions on postpartum psychosis and called medical professionals to back up the claim that postpartum psychosis is real and can actually make someone do crazy things. Basically, they argued that no mother in her right senses would purposefully hurt or even off their own offspring, and for her to have done something so evil, then she must not have been in her right senses. Well, the court believed this, and she was sent to a mental hospital. And this is just a perfect example of how the insanity loophole works. So if you were to commit a huge crime and argue with this defense, you could simply claim that you were not responsible for the crime, but the severe mental illness or breakdown you have is responsible. It's like committing theft, and when you're caught, you say your depression made you do it. However, for this defense to actually work, your lawyer has to prove to the judge and court beyond reasonable doubt that you were truly not in the right frame of mind when the crime was committed. And if he can back that up with some evidence, then you might actually have a shot. But instead of going to prison, you'd be sent to a psychiatric facility, which is honestly a whole lot better. At least you won't be in the same place as Diddy. The mistake of fact defense. So, just imagine you're in a cold winter storm, stranded and stuck in the middle of nowhere because your car decided it was the perfect time for an existential crisis. After spending what feels like hours just standing by the roadside, praying for a miracle, a stranger pulls up and offers you a ride, which you gladly accept. But apparently, this Good Samaritan's trunk is packing more powder than a makeup influencer's vanity. A kilo of cocaine, to be exact. Yep, enough powder to bake a cake for a Colombian drug lord's birthday. And just when you think things can't get worse, you're pulled over and suddenly arrested for drug trafficking. This is definitely the worst case of the wrong place at the wrong time. Anyway, you're stuck there screaming at the top of your lungs about your innocence, but they have fallen on deaf ears. After all, that's the same line every guilty person uses. However, all hope is not lost because your lawyer can argue your case with the mistake of fact loophole. This loophole says you can't be punished for a crime if you didn't know you were doing something illegal. So yeah, even if you're sitting next to enough drugs to get Pablo Escobar jealous, as long as you genuinely had no clue what was going on, you've got a shot. It's basically the legal equivalent of an oops, my bad. And this worked quite fine for James Jennings in 1979. Jennings decided to play lumberjack and chop down 225 trees on what he believed was his property. Plot twist, it wasn't. When he was taken to court, he basically said Siri gave him the wrong address and his map reading skills were no worse than a 3rd grader. The court bought his story and he walked out a free man. However, for this loophole to work, your lawyer has to prove beyond reasonable doubt that you were as clueless as a rat in a maze. They have to show the judge and jury that anybody else in their unfortunate situation would have made the exact same mistake. They could even argue that you thought the powder was, I don't know, flour for a bake sale or something. And if they succeeded, it's like getting a legal get-out-of-jail-free card. The duress defense. Let's say you were walking into a bank with your wife and 2 little kids. Then, out of nowhere, a car screeches up and some goon with a gun grabs your whole family. You're given the ultimate ultimatum. Rob the bank, or it's curtains for your loved ones. So, like any reasonable person in this insane situation, you go along with it because the only thing worse than losing your money is losing your family. Now, you get arrested, and before you can even explain, you're thrown into a legal whirlwind. But guess what? There's a neat little loophole that might just save your skin, and it's called under duress. This means you basically admit that, yeah, you robbed the bank, but it was literally by force. If you can prove to the court that you were genuinely facing a life or death situation, then technically you're not held responsible for the crime. It's not like you woke up and thought, today seems like a great day to pull off a heist. But, and this is a big but, there are rules. Your lawyer has to prove that the threat was legitimate, like no joke that you weren't just playing Bonnie and Clyde because you were bored. They need to show the court that you had absolutely no other option than to go through with the crime. The necessity defense. Alright, picture this. You've finally persuaded your Netflix-loving fiancé to ditch the couch and go on a romantic hike. You both set out looking like the perfect outdoorsy couple, but in a few hours, Mother Nature decides to throw a blizzard at you. Now, instead of a rom-com moment, you're staring at your own survival thriller. After freezing for a bit and debating the value of nature, you spot a cabin nearby. And, well, desperate times call for desperate measures, so you obviously break in. Now you're living out your Goldilocks fantasy, eating someone else's porridge and burning their firewood. But unlike the fairy tale, when the owner returns, they don't just huff and puff, they call the cops. Now you're trying to sweet-talk the jury, explaining that this was a crime of necessity, because freezing to death wasn't on your hiking itinerary. This is literally what the necessity defense means. It's a type of defense where the phrase, "I had to do it," might actually work. This legal loophole is built on the crazy idea that maybe, just maybe, the reasons behind a crime matter. And if it were a crime committed to prevent greater harm, you probably would get a pat on the back. It's like the court saying, "We see what you did, but you were in a tight spot, so we'll let it slide." This defense worked out well for John Thornton, who went full John Wick mode to save his dog from a veterinary clinic that refused to release the poor pup. Thornton busted in Mission Impossible style and argued that his dog's life was in danger and needed urgent medical care. The judge, who was probably a dog person, was moved by this tale and set Thornton free. However, you should probably know that not every judge would buy your sob story and justify the crime. Also, the damage you cause by breaking the law needs to be less than the danger you're preventing. So, sneaking into the movies because you were in danger of missing the latest Marvel film would probably not get you applause in court. The UK's antique gun exemption. So there you are, in a shop that smells like mothballs and lost empires when you spot it. A gun so old it probably fought Napoleon. It's rusty, it's crusty, and in a country like the UK, known for having stricter gun laws than a librarian with a noise complaint, you figure this dusty piece of history is a replica, right? Wrong. It's fully functional. This relic could still shoot more than just a glare, and it's legal thanks to one of the juiciest loopholes in British law, the antique gun exemption rule. This rule is basically a museum pass for gun. If the firearm was made before 1939 and it looks like it's old enough to have voted for Winston Churchill, you can buy it without a license. Yes, really, no paperwork, no registration, just you and your vintage boomstick. This loophole led to a whole messy situation with a man named Paul Edmonds. Edmonds imported more antique guns than the Tower of London, added some fresh ammo, and sold them faster than hot scones at a village fete, creating a loophole in another loophole. Suddenly, Britain had more armed criminals than you could count. These guns were used to commit a lot of hideous crimes, but according to the law, Edmonds had done nothing wrong but sell antique guns. This whole debacle made the government realize their gun laws had more holes than a granny's underpants. So they tightened things up, and now not only does your gun need to be older than sliced bread, but it also needs to use a firing mechanism or ammunition so outdated they'd make a musketeer cringe. If your gun doesn't require gunpowder and a little elbow grease to fire, it's no longer considered a charming piece of history, it's a felony waiting to happen. The potato chip gambling loophole. You've always loved to gamble and dreamed of owning at least one gambling den when you grow. But just as you're about to go all in, you find out gambling's illegal in your city. Talk about a bad hand. However, before you start to talk about shattered dreams, you should probably know there's a loophole that can fix the problem called the potato chip gambling loophole. Definitely a weird name to give a legal term, but it technically shows a person ways to sneak around the illegality of gambling. And it did wonders in Japan. You see, in Japan, gambling for cash is illegal, but some crafty companies like Fujiya decided to play their cards right. They hid a bunch of lottery numbers inside bags of chips, and for just $3, you could become a millionaire. All of a sudden, reaching for the bottom of the bag wasn't just about finding crumbs. Talk about an amazing 2-for-1 offer. This loophole worked so well that if the authorities caught anyone with a ticket, they could easily just claim that they weren't gambling since they didn't pay for the lottery tickets, but the chips. The trend spread faster than gossip in a small town. Soon you could find lottery chips, lottery chocolates, and even lottery ice cream. It was like Willy Wonka's factory if Willy Wonka had a gambling problem. When everyone and their dogs started eating lottery chips, Japan's National Police Agency decided to be the ultimate party poopers. They put their foot down, declaring these snacks were now equally illegal. Corporate inversion loophole. After decades of being sidelined, you've finally been invited to the big kids table in your family's multi-billion-dollar company business. As a way of proving you're no longer a baby wearing onesies, you introduced your family to a magic portal that can make your tax obligations disappear faster than your dad's receding hairline. Well, it's not necessarily a magic portal, it's the corporate inversion loophole. This loophole is like playing a game of now you see me, now you don't with the IRS. Basically, a company in the US buys a smaller foreign company, and then all of a sudden, corporation declares the foreign company is actually in charge of the US company. It's like a corporate version of Freaky Friday, but instead of swapping bodies, they're swapping tax rates. When they merged with Canadian chain Tim Hortons, Burger King took a play out of this playbook. Suddenly, Burger King became way more Canadian than Drake, drinking maple syrup and playing hockey. This move resulted in a tasty tax reduction that made Pfizer so jealous they had to try to get a piece of the action too. They tried to merge with an Irish company, but unfortunately for them, the US government shut it down faster than you can say "God bless America" and changed the rules as fast as they could.